do you feel like emotional regulation was one of the first changes that most people see? Because that's something we talk about on the show all the time and is part of the OFC. If you talk, you've heard me talk about that, the prefrontal cortex. So why do you think that the emotional regulation is one of those first changes that you see in your sensory enrichment?
That's a really good question because it is such a pervasive challenge, right, within autism. So part of the mechanism of how the program works is that it boosts neurotransmitters. And so the data shows that serotonin and dopamine are boosted instantly 100% when even just one sense is engaged, like touch or smell on their own. But what's amazing is when you combine them together at the same time, they boost instantly up to 300 and 400%. And not just for the duration of that sensory interaction, like during an exercise, but the boost can stay elevated for even over an hour, at least above that 100% mark. And so it's really hard to be sad or anxious when you have more than adequate levels of happy hormones running around your brain. And the most powerful part of the program for us was what we call the meltdown miracle, because there's evidence to support that our amygdalas in autism, which I'm sure you've talked about as well, they can be overactive, often overgrown, which makes them especially hypersensitive. So, and we can see that in science up to even as early as 2 years old. So our amygdala is that almond-shaped part of the brain that's responsible for emotions and sense of danger. And God really did an amazing thing when he designed us, which was to strongly connect our olfactory senses, so our sense of smell, to our amygdala. So that's really great for smelling something that could be dangerous to keep you alive. Or on the flip side, calming us with something that smells really nice. And so when someone is in the throes of a meltdown, the presence of a pleasant aroma can actually act like a giant stop sign to the amygdala, which can actually take anywhere from just a few seconds to a few minutes. It's going to depend on the person, the scent, all those kinds of things, the function of the meltdown. But going back to that cue training that we talked about, it's always going to be much more effective to prevent an overload than to try and stop one. For our daughter, when she was in escalated aggressive states, we would be really intentional not to engage verbally because, again, that prefrontal cortex is not engaged. And we would actually just apply a scent to her clothes or maybe a roller bottle on the back of the neck with essential oil. Copaiba is really good for that. And just give her some space. And because being within arm's reach would usually result in us getting hurt or just escalate her in general. And we could see within moments of having the scent on her that, she wasn't one of those 5-second girls. She was a couple-minute girl, and that's okay. But you could watch, the natural decline from really intense anger and destruction to a shift into that more kind of sad and into recovery, which is a normal progression of emotional regulation. And sometimes she would even just initiate putting herself in her room for a timeout, which would just make our jaw completely fall down.
And so if you're comparing then the sensory enrichment to the gold standard of ABA, how do you compare that? Is it just apples to oranges kind of a thing, or do you think sensory enrichment works better, more consistently?
Yeah, I would say that what really stands out for me is that neurosensory enrichment really works with those underlying mechanisms that might be contributing to challenges rather than focusing on the challenges themselves. And what's super interesting is where ABA directly targets the deficit head on, neurosensory enrichment actually assesses the brain as a whole and determines where the brain is strong and where there might be neighboring areas that need that nurturing. So the program moves forward, stimulating areas of strength in proximity to areas that show readiness for boosting. And the stimulation of that neighbor is going to support the neural growth of those goal areas. And it's also been proven to help other therapies be up to 6 times more effective. So if you're already doing ABA or other approaches, it can be a really great complementary option to boost what you're already doing and those general outcomes. And the
Right.
benefit of this approach is that it's much less stressful because you're targeting strengths instead of deficits. And it's much more efficient, which is going to give you faster results. And another benefit that I absolutely love is that whether this is for a caregiver and a child or adults in a relationship, you're going to be interacting with the program every day, even briefly, but in a way that helps the other person feel good. And that's just going to inherently contribute to that relational repair, which is really fantastic if you kind of want to go from being anxious around your loved one to enjoying their company without worrying, am I going to say the right thing or do the right thing? And so for any couples who haven't made progress with, say, psychotherapy or other approaches, or maybe you have a loved one who is just completely refusing those types of things, this can be a great option because there isn't any talking in the program.
All right, so let's switch that because we've been talking about, kind of kids to adults. So because a lot of times I get the question from the neurotypical spouse, my husband won't even look at this neurodiversity. He won't get assessed. He won't do couples therapy. He's completely out of it. But I'm hearing you say that this is something that can actually help neurotypicals as well. Yeah, neurotypical with post-traumatic stress or anxiety or mood issues. This might be approach of, hey, do this sensory enrichment therapy with me. And so it's maybe a roundabout way to bring some help in that doesn't involve any kind of talking. So how would you use this? Because some might say, well, Sarah, you and your husband are both neurodivergent. I'm in a neurotypical neurodivergent relationship. So talk a little bit about with couple work, how it could be helpful.
For sure. So whether there's one or both people in a neurodiverse relationship, as you say, if they're interested in the program, it can be really helpful for increasing those categories we touched on earlier, right? The mood, the anxiety, depression, memory, learning, attention, sensory, which can be super helpful in the area of intimacy, and then sleep and communication. So, we're leaving the labels of things out. Like when you start the program, we're not necessarily looking for you to disclose if there's a neurodiverse diagnoses or suspicion. It's really just targeting those areas, the categories that we're looking to support, which, like you say, could be neurotypical as well. As long as the individual doesn't have an aversion to watching demonstration videos with a child, they can get past that somewhat simple and sometimes juvenile seeming exercises at times, they're going to see some sort of progress. In fact, we're actually so confident that it will work for you that if you don't see any change at all and you followed the program for 30 days, all of your money is refunded, which is super hard to find in a therapeutic field. And you can even try some of the sample exercises that are on the website for free. The program actually has over 500 different activities. So you may or may not be assigned the ones that you see there, but it would give you sort of an idea of what kind of exercises that you might be assigned. And like you touched on earlier in terms of the orange, there, as a quick example, maybe one activity is called the water game. It's one of my favorites. It's a favorite of clients, is dipping your hands in bowls of water. Maybe you've got some large salad bowls. One's hot water, one's cold water. When I say hot, I mean bath temperature water, just for a few seconds. And then you're going to let them up. Your partner switches the bowl locations. You dip it in again for a few seconds. You do that a few times. Or like you said, maybe you're smelling orange oil. Maybe you look at a photo of oranges and then you put those down and someone touches you with an orange on your arm. And so it may seem completely insignificant and again, juvenile, but let's go back to the water game. The explanation for that neuroscientifically is that the cold water in that bowl is actually going to present to your body as a cold response, or rather as a stress response, and then the hot water is going to allow you to tolerate it and feel good. And so that ability to increase stress tolerance in that scenario over time will generalize towards other life situations that require stress tolerance, which again could be neurotypical or not. And again, by those examples, you're probably realizing that this is a partner program, which it is. It's designed to have a participant and someone to facilitate the activities. If you're an adult listening who lives alone, but you're like, hey, I really would love to try this. I have worked with other clients who do it independently. And we do try and modify where possible so they can do it on their own. I will be honest that a client who has higher motivation to put the work in and follow through will see some progress, but not all protocols can be adopted for solo use. So there kind of will be a limit. to the outcome. I've actually been working with a wonderful neurotypical woman who's a survivor of human trafficking. So she's doing the program for trauma and stress, those types of things. And she did the program with me for several months on her own and was really happy with the progress that she saw. So it is possible, but definitely recommended when you have one or both partners willing to do the program together. And if you would like to do the program for yourself, but your other half isn't likely to facilitate for you, then if you have any children who would be willing to help, they don't even have to be very old. Like I've seen, 5, 6-year-olds be able to do bits here and there and still be successful. And, if you're not sure if that scenario is feasible, then again, you can try using some of the free activities on the website just to test that theory for a few days before you jump in. And I also want you to know that you don't have to do it perfectly. Yes, it's a daily program, but life is going to get in the way at times. So the really great thing about the program is that you can just adjust the intensity of a daily session to accommodate the needs for that day. We didn't do it perfectly every day, and we still had tons and tons of improvement. I've yet to meet a client who did it perfectly too. So don't worry, I don't expect anybody else to be 100% of the time either. And I always tell clients it's better to do a little bit every day rather than, 2 days a week at longer sessions. Even if the occasional day is only 30 seconds to 60 seconds, because you still are providing the brain with tools to move forward daily. And if something happens where you can't do therapy for 3 or 4 days, no problem. In that case, we just sort of stay on a worksheet longer to really make sure that those new connections are supported.
So before I ask how you work with your clients and the cadence, I want to say this as a therapist because I'm already in hearing some things that I've heard clients say. Number one, we don't have time 5 to 10 minutes a day to do something like that. So I have 2 comments to that. If that is the case, there's too much on your schedule. You're too busy. Something needs to change because if you don't have 5 or 10 minutes, even with some of the things that I'm trying in my therapeutic approaches, if there's not 5 or 10 minutes a day, that is a symptom of a bigger problem. Secondly, I would usually say to my daughter's teachers when they would say, like, we don't have time to do this proactive thing or preventative thing, I would say, do you have time for a 30 to 45-minute meltdown and then the recovery of that meltdown? And then to help her get back on focus for the rest of the school day. It feels like that 5 to 10 minutes a day is far more helpful than the aftermath. So to take that to adults, do you have time for that thing that's going to escalate? You're both going to be really hurt for the next hour or two. And it doesn't usually take a few minutes for recovery. Sometimes it's days or weeks before couples come back to recovery or refriend. So anything that can helpful. So I always like to recommend things such as a sensory enrichment program. It does no harm. Worst case scenario, you don't get any benefit from it. It's a neutral. But the best case scenario is that you have found positive things. You have regulation, you have less escalation, you're retraining the brain, all of those things. So I think it's got a high reward, low risk. So that's why I'm kind of excited about this program. As other things might like spend all this money, bought all of these things, and it didn't work. Whereas this is something that could have a very high reward for very low risk, but you got to put the time in to do it as a couple with a good attitude. If either partner kind of comes in with like, I shouldn't be having to do this. This is a waste of my time. You should just be doing this, or you shouldn't have to do that. That's not really a partner team approach. And so I think with everything, it's the attitude you bring to it also is going to affect the outcome. So how do you meet with clients? Is it phone? Is it Zoom? Is it weekly? What's the cadence of this, Sarah?
For sure. Well, I'm working with neurodiverse population, so I'm going to be super flexible. But generally, there are weekly 15-minute phone check-ins with the private coaching option. And I also do small groups of 2 or 3 where we do video meetings. I call them my duos or my trios, which can be with other caregivers that either I pair together or if people come to the program. Because typically we know other people in our community that are struggling with the same thing. If they want to create their own duos or trios, they can, and they actually get a discount for going that way. And I know the idea of video calls can sometimes be like very, very aversive. But I'll say that I've created a really unique group experience because I've had some unfortunate group experiences myself. So I really wanted to have a neurodiverse experience in mind to minimize discomfort. We don't have any crosstalk set up, so people are given 10 minutes to speak directly with me while other people are on the call. They're muted and they're just observing, which can be helpful for the observer to kind of catch a few extra tips and tricks along the way that might be helpful for them if they're experiencing the same challenges. And I never require video to be on. As long as I can hear you and you can hear me, I'm totally happy with that. We don't talk about locations or last names, so it's pretty anonymous. But essentially during those check-ins, whether it's phone or video, we follow a 5-question framework during the sessions to keep it really efficient and on track and productive. So clients will fill out a brief 5-question survey every week within 24 hours. We're talking like 1 sentence long each question. It starts with any wow moments that they may have had as we can celebrate, because there's going to be lots of them. And then we discuss any smaller observations, things that are emerging. Then we kind of rate the week from 1 to 5 so I can get a sense of where you're at. And then from there, we just discuss any challenges that you're having. So you provide modifications that might be needed. And then you have a chance to ask any questions that you have outside of that. And I never need to meet with a child who's in the program. It's just a connection with the caregiver. For couples who are doing the program, I do recommend that they choose the private coaching option with me so that, we can allow for enough time to cover both people's journey really well. If there's just one person in the relationship who kind of wants to be the go-to for connection with me, and that's fine. They can do that independently or with groups, as long as you're working within, the time frame that you've got. I do offer text and email support as well. And because there are, some people that prefer not to have that regular schedule. They just kind of want to ask the questions that they have on demand. And that's totally fine. I respect and accommodate that. We can also arrange for things like, voice messaging apps like Voxer or Messenger so that, sometimes, whether clarification needs to be done beyond texting. And I will say that I do offer the program at a subsidized cost from other providers because it's really important to me to make it accessible for families. But there's also further financial assistance further financial assistance that's available. You just have to ask.
Okay, that's all amazing. So, do you also have a YouTube channel? Because you mentioned some, like you can go on and look at some things and kind of experiment. Is that on your YouTube channel?
So I do have a YouTube channel, but it's not what you think. One of the activities that comes up a lot in the program is called art and music. And so it requires a painting style art without any letters or words while you listen to classical or instrumental music. And it can be sometimes challenging to acquire, a vast array of those materials without being at the library every day. So I wanted to make it easier for clients by creating 2-minute videos that have paired those things together in a variety of themes for kids and adults. And I've also created other 2-minute non-therapeutic videos that they kind of seem similar at first glance. We call them stress busters because there's evidence to support that simply just the act of enjoying relaxing music and looking at beautiful things like high definition photography or video can help manage stress. So I've added a playlist for those as well, because it's kind of handy to have on the go when you need a 2-minute reset. Like you said, you may not have, hours a day, but, to make 2 or 3 minutes, if you as the partner or the caregiver, you don't have the luxury of being able to have a lot of stress coping mechanisms, this can be really helpful. If you want an extra boost, then smell something really nice while you're watching the videos. So they can be found at the Crown Family Wellness channel on YouTube. We love requests. So if you have a special interest or theme that you'd love to see, my 9-year-old daughter and I really love making them and adding them to the channel. So in fact, she actually loves making them so much that she now has her own channel called Spectrum Sparkle Studio. So if you have any kiddos that would love to ask her to make them a video of their special interest, then she'd be more than thrilled. Her email is in the description.
Fun. All right. Well, we have 10 minutes left to cover nutrition. So we've covered how you support neurodiversity with neuroscience to families and sensory enrichment. What about the aspect of nutrition and nutraceuticals, which you said is a fancy word for supplements? Give us a highlight of that.
Sure. So I'm also a registered nutritionist. So I started studying nutrition for personal interest almost 15 years ago when one of our daughters had such severe constipation. It was actually pushing up on her lungs, causing complications during a bout of bronchitis. She ended up going to the hospital in really not good condition. So at the time, I didn't know that severe stool backup, or sometimes called fecal loading, and leaky gut, which is that where those tight junctions of the gut lining are inflamed and let undigested food particles and pathogens in the bloodstream, which then, inflammation and all that stuff. All these things are common in neurodiversity, which I didn't know at that time. And they can contribute to and be a result of, gut imbalances and then in turn behaviors and moods, which ABA and sensory enrichment can't address. So within 2 weeks of identifying and removing her food intolerances, her bowel eliminations returned to normal, which was super surprising because we had actually already been one of those families where we're no junk food, we're no sugar. So to know that there were more things we could do naturally was really helpful. Since then, I decided to pursue education in nutrition formally so that I could specialize in neurodiversity. And I've really come to learn so much about the biochemical differences in autism, which actually makes a lot of sense if you consider that it impacts our whole body and not just our brain.
Absolutely. And most people don't realize that the gut is the second brain, right? There's connections, especially if you're studying polyvagal and the polyvagal system and all of that, there is a connection. And there are so much that we've learned. Like 20 years ago when we were doing this with our daughter, people thought we were absolutely insane. Because 20 years ago, this was like voodoo or witchcraft almost to some people. Like it's craziness. But just how much food affects our brain. We know already that the autistic brain is highly inflamed and there's all this inflammation going on. And so I think it's very important to note that when you're working with nutrition and nutraceuticals, we're not trying to cure someone's autism. You're only trying to for any brain, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, if you have less inflammation in your gut and in your brain, that is better for everybody, no matter what your neurotype is. So just give us some examples of how you have seen nutrition impact your own neurodiverse family.
Yeah, so changing my food intake helped me immensely. I learned that I was super sensitive to caffeine and sugar. Having either of those would lead to panic attacks. Even just one steeped tea would give me panic attacks and anxiety for days, and chronic anxiety, awful mood swings to the point that my husband knew to avoid me for a minimum of 2 days until it was safe for him if I had ingested sugar or anything like that. And I am pretty sure that it's a large part of why I've been able to stay off sedatives and rotating antidepressants that weren't really working for me and probably why I was originally misdiagnosed as bipolar, along with having some mineral imbalances that actually scientifically can affect your psychological health. Another shocking discovery was that I started taking nutraceuticals within 2 months of ones that targeted my gut health. My crippling social anxiety was almost completely gone. Like I'm telling you, it was so bad. I used to be a children's pastor for almost 5 years. And those recruiting Sundays where you have to go up in front of everybody and spotlight and, even just knowing that I would be seen by the congregation that I knew and loved for many years, rather than just kind of being behind the scenes, that I would be seen was so stressful to me that I would immediately get super sick with a cold or a flu. So when I told my family and friends, now I do webinars, I do speaking engagements for ministry conferences and now podcasts, they cannot believe the change just with that.
So what are some of the tweaks you made to nutrition with the children and things that you saw that gut balance brought to your kids?
Right. So, we did the standard gluten-free, casein or dairy-free diet for a while, and we did see some improvement for sure. I know that this particular diet is pretty commonly recommended for autism, but I don't think it's widely understood why it's helpful. And I could go into a lot of the mechanisms. I won't today, but one biochemical reason that really stood out to me is that, and maybe it resonates with one of your listeners, is that when gluten and casein are broken down in the digestion process, individuals on the spectrum can often process these proteins differently, in that they end up interacting with opiate receptors in our brain. So, for example, casein can convert into casomorphins, which can be an even more potent opioid than morphine, and then can lead to behavior and cognitive impacts, and then, contribute to the rigidity around eating preferences, because then it becomes, an addictive experience. when we started working with our biomedical doctor who specializes in autism for nutrition, she understood these mechanisms really well. So we took our dietary changes from there even further by adopting a biomedical diet, which is exactly what you said in that last question, is the brain inflammation that is so common in autism, and then again impacts behavior and cognitive function. And so going that route, really we noticed even more benefit, including a reduction in carb cravings, less rigidity around food. It's also really common that when you go gluten and dairy free, that when you replace those foods, it's often with, those commercially processed ones that have ingredients that are still going to feed those microbes in the gut that's going to contribute to inflammation. It's not the easiest thing to do, but nothing worthwhile really is. And so we are and were and continue to be committed to whatever is going to be helpful for our daughters to reach their full potential and have their best outcome. We also learned about methylation and how synthetic nutrients that are really common in commercially processed or enriched foods can actually really slow down that methylation cycle that we all have, whether you're neurodiverse or neurotypical. And so that can lead to cognitive, behavioral, and other challenges. And even just the simple act of removing those synthetic nutrients, that you can often see changes. Even better if you can find natural sources like folate instead of folic acid, and methylated forms of nutrients and vitamins can actually make the world of difference.
Right. I've gone through as a neurotypical, I've had autoimmune issues, lots of stress, lots of things. And so I'm in a biomedical thing right now. And so it's gluten-free, casein-free, removing inflammations, high quality supplements or nutraceuticals to kind of create that balance. And so it's really, I just thought I was always an anxious person, but even just in this new kind of biomedical treatment myself, my own anxiety has gone down. My cortisol levels are kind of coming back to where they should be versus like adrenal fatigue. I was in adrenal fatigue, but I've been in this process like 18 months. Because when you're dealing with food and supplements and finding all of the right balances, it's not an easy thing to do. So I want to set the stage. If you go a biomedical approach, it's a long haul of a thing, and there's a lot of experimentation, to kind of get what you want. And it's a lifestyle change. It's not a quick fix. It's a lifestyle change.
For sure.
So you have given us so much information today on kind of your opinions of ABAs and protocols and nutrition and nutraceuticals. How do people find you if they're interested and they've heard this and they want to reach out to you? How are all the ways they find you?
Sure. So you can visit the website at crownfamilywellness.com, or also the Autistic Nutritionist. They both go to the same place. You can do a free 20-minute consult, or you can have a look under the free set, so sensory enrichment therapy resources, to try out some free ones, or you can have a look and see if I'm speaking with any webinars to give you more information. And I am hoping to launch free virtual drop-in support calls. So if people want to try out the exercises and kind of connect to tell us how it went, ask any questions about that, they can do that. So that's pretty much how you can connect.
I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. We tried to take this really big thing and get it under an hour. But there's so many things that Sarah has expertise in. And again, I really value the neurodivergent person's perspective, lived experience. And if you're making recommendations on this, I feel like that carries weight. So thank you so much for being on the show to discuss all of these topics today, Sarah.